Welcome back to the Camp Memories podcast from Kramer to the Hill. We are pleased to bring you part one of our three-part conversation with Rudy Valner, who as a camper and counselor brought his family's culture and flair from Mexico City to Malibu. In part one, we talk with Rudy about how his family learned about camp and how he adjusted to the camp community while learning English along the way. Enjoy.
Hi there, and welcome to Camp Memories from Kramer to the Hill. Welcome, Rudy Valner. How are you, Rudy?
Paul, I'm doing great. Great to see you. Great to see Catherine. Great to see Paul.
Well, we thank you for taking the time to do this with us this morning. Wanted to get started and really understand, how did the Valner family find out about Camp S. Kramer? And what's the origin story of how the Valner families came to Malibu?
Well, the story goes more or less along the following lines. And I'll give you a little bit also of history of the Valner family. My father by profession was a doctor, and he actually did his specialization. He was an OBGYN, and he specialized and finished all his work in Rochester. Because I'm a December baby, and so at the time my father really had papers to be here in this country to do the work that he was supposed to do, i.e. to become a learned medical doctor in the area he was going to be working in. When I was born prior to me being born in December, in November, the heat in my parents' apartment broke down. And this being Rochester, my father told my mother, you know what, go back to Mexico, let me finish things up anyways. They didn't have papers to stay. So my mother went back to Mexico. My father showed up a couple weeks later. I was delivered in Mexico City at the time. And so what really came from that is my father always had the belief that he wanted the whole family to ultimately come back to the United States at some point in time. My father was very much a believer that if we were going to be successful, this is where success was at. We could be successful in Mexico, but it's better be successful in the United States than in Mexico. And that's how we were educated. And so what also ended up happening is my parents wanted a place for us kids, starting with me, where we could actually also learn our Judaism. We grew up in a very traditional society in Mexico City when it came down to Judaism. The concept of, for example, Reform Judaism does not exist in Mexico. And if anything, it's just presently starting to evolve. But my parents grew up in Orthodox families, and when things started becoming reformed, there was more the conservative movement, which still to this day is what is prevalent. If it's not Orthodox, it's conservative. There's no Reform Judaism. And so my parents wanted a place for their children where to learn Judaism in a different way. Summer camp was the perfect place. And so my parents, they had friends throughout several areas in the United States. And my mother happened to have at the time a cousin here in Los Angeles. Ironically, I do know they were members of Sinai Temple. And my parents asked which are the better Jewish camps to send kids to in the United States. And because of the cousin my mother had, they felt very comfortable that Camp S. Kramer was a place where their eldest was going to go to. And so here I came at the age of 9, pretty much not knowing English, dropped off at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, and that was the way it was. My parents never came to visit the camp. My parents only knew about the camp from hearsay, just like they heard about 3-4 others on the East Coast, in the Midwest, and they chose Camp S. Kramer because that just resonated better with them.
That's a great story. I love it.
You know, Rudy, it's so good to hear that story because I remember when I was a little boy and you were a few years my senior, that just a few, that I was amazed to meet a boy from Mexico City because I had heard in my family that my mom had aunts and uncles living there in Mexico City, and that I had like a whole bunch of cousins there that I had never met, and that my supposedly my family owned a matzo bakery over there named Panfiller. That was the
Yep.
name of the matzo.
Filler bread. Pan filler.
Panfiller.
Pan filler.
Filler. Yeah, that Filler was my
Yep.
mother's maiden name. And so I remember talking to you about that probably 45 years ago when I was just little. And I said, I've never met any of those people. I don't know about it, but they left Poland before the Shoah and came to Mexico and established themselves to have a matzo bakery there, and that they completely survived World War II intact in Mexico City. And I remember that that was something that you and I discussed way, way back then.
Yeah, the story of the story of Ashkenazim Jews, especially in Mexico, is one that my story is very similar to that of your family. On my mother's side were Polish, on my father's side were Lithuanian. My grandparents came in the 1920, 1921. That's when they established themselves, and they came to Mexico because in 1917 there was an immigration act here in the United States that, notwithstanding it said no Jews, it was anti-Semitic because it did not allow any further Eastern Europeans to come into this country. So that's where you have a lot of the Eastern Europeans going to places like Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, which have Jewish communities throughout. And the story of your family, Paul, is very similar to mine.
Yeah, you bet. And, you know, I can only imagine what it must have been like to come to America as a new kid without having command of English, and then to come into Malibu where you're meeting a bunch of children who had a very different upbringing than you coming from a society where Reform Judaism was not at the time anything, and here in Los Angeles where Reform Judaism in the 1970s was already, probably the most common type of Judaism in our city at that time. So talk a little bit about how you felt as a little boy adapting to what you found in America.
Talking about Campus Kramer, one of Steve Brewer's favorite sayings is you never know when you touch a kid's life. In my case, I'm going to tell you the story. You never know when you touch a family's life. I came here, the very first time I came to camp was 1970. Prior to going to camp, my parents brought us, when I say us, it was me being the eldest, Alberto and Arthur, my younger brothers. And we took a trip. We went to Disneyland and we went to San Francisco and then LA. And then they dropped me off at Wilshire Boulevard Temple to go up to camp. I had been away from home on sleepaways of a couple of nights, on the equivalent of the Mexican Boy Scouts from the Jewish community. But I had never been away from home for more than a couple of nights. When I showed up to camp, I got on the bus. I could not understand anything anybody said, even though I went to school that taught me English. What I did have the ability to do after being up at camp for about a day and a half is I told my counselor at the time that I was miserable. I could not stay at camp. I still knew my parents were in LA because my parents dropped me off, let's say, on a Sunday. This was a Monday afternoon, and I knew my parents were going back to Mexico Wednesday morning. So my chance to go back to Mexico and go back with my parents, I had a very short window of time, and I came to the conclusion this was not my place. And I was able to communicate the fact that I needed my parents. And on Tuesday morning, my parents showed up to Malibu, along with my brothers, in the car that we had rented, to pick me up. I packed my stuff. We left. I still remember Steve Brewer talking to my dad outside. If you remember the old office, outside in the corner of that office, my dad and Steve. And I know Steve said to my dad, "Let him stay. We'll make him very happy." And my father did not listen to Steve. Here we go. We packed the luggage in the trunk of my parents' car. And I still remember as we were literally leaving the campgrounds, getting into Pacific Coast Highway, my dad saying to my mother, "Do you think we can get a refund for camp?" And my mother said, "Look, I don't know. I'll call him tomorrow and we'll find out what we can do." And here we go. We drive down Pacific Coast Highway. And this is lunchtime. So we left before lunch took place, camp. And we got to Trancas Market. And both of my brothers started just banging on the back, saying they were hungry, they were hungry. And we stopped at Trancas Market. There used to be a coffee shop there. And we sat there, had lunch. And my parents talked me into staying. So after about an hour and a half of having lunch, they talked me into staying. They told me they would send me candy and they would send me a met and they would send me books. And here we went back up again, Pacific Coast Highway. And I still remember the face at that time. I think my counselors were a guy by the name of Neil Daniels and Bruce Greenwald. And I remember driving back into camp and the face of Neil at the time when he saw the car driving back again. It's like, these people left. What are they doing back here? The bottom line is that went back, they dropped me off. My parents went back to Mexico the day after. I stayed in camp for the next 3.5 weeks and loved it. But if you think of that moment, that really is a moment that did not only change my life, but it changed entirely my family's life. We would not be here. I would not be married with the kids that I have. I mean, I know that my life would have been completely different. And of course, what came after that is history because we kept on going back to camp forever, generation to generation, and here we are.
Having seen over the years that I've been on staff, the campers that have been successful and the campers that have gone home, when you and your family made that, decision to go back to camp after your delightful lunch at the Trancas coffee shop that is probably now that Starbucks, what changed for you? Or maybe it was, what changed how your counselors approached, your experience as a non-native English speaker? How did you make that adjustment and ultimately settle into your camp experience?
Not only me, but I'd say even, my brothers, they came very similar to me in terms of their knowledge, their ability to speak English. Everybody at camp was always extremely welcoming. Everybody, camp is, it's not only what camp did for us when we were younger, but I would say that all of us here in this screen will agree, camp was utopia. I mean, camp was the perfect world. Everybody was your friend. Nobody was your enemy. You wanted the best for everybody and they wanted the best for you. And so what really happened for me when I got back, I do know, especially the counselors were just thrilled to see me back. Not because of me. They were just thrilled to have, at that time, 160 kids. I was one more of those 160. And everybody was just happy to have you and be part of the family. And they were all very helpful. Those that could not, there was many that would try to speak Spanish to me and try to teach me and get me to speak the language. And quite frankly, many of them succeeded and helped me tremendously during my first year.
Well, that leads me to a question that here you are, you've worked your way to fit into the camp community, and comes up onto the afternoon for tryouts for talent show. and you get up there and you audition and you get one of the parts, and you start bringing some of your home life, Mexico City, with La Bamba. What was there any inspiration behind that?
La Bamba in Mexico, Paul, is nothing other than a folk dance. What you learn of La Bamba here in the States, the Richie Valens La Bamba is not something that we really grew up in Mexico with. Like La Bamba is a folk dance, and the words of La Bamba are the ones that Richie Valens also uses in his song, but it's done more on a very traditional dance way. That's what I knew as La Bamba myself. I think it was 1972. Barbara Lauterbach was a song leader at camp. And she grabbed me one day and she said, "Do you know this song?" And Barbara had her guitar, and it was La Bamba. And it was La Bamba in the Richie Valens tone. I said, "I know all the words. I don't know the tune. I don't know the music. The music's rock and roll." So she said, "Do you want to try it?" And I said, "Of course." And so we tried it one day just for having fun. And she basically said, "Do you want to try doing it in the talent show?" I said, "Sure, why not?" So we got up there and she played, and Barbara was a fantastic song leader, full of energy, wonderful, wonderful woman. And she went in the back and just said, just follow the tune and just sing. And I just sang it out. And it was a great hit at the time, 1972. What happened was a year after, one of my favorite people ever, Mark Pollock, grabbed me and he said, "Are you singing La Bamba again, Mexican?" And Mark was a very rough and tough guy. And he said, "Hey, Mexican, are you going to sing La Bamba again?" I said, "Sure." So he said, "Come over." And he started saying, "When you go up there, I want to see you move and shake. And I want to see you do, really move and shake. I think that's going to be great for you." So I listened to Mark. And if there was one thing that us Valner boys we were not shy. And not only did I decide to move and shake, but I decided to wear at the time overalls. And when I sang La Bamba, I decided, don't ask me why, to undo my overalls, get them down and just take my shirt off and throw it out to the fans.
That's right.
And that's the story. And it really was because of people like Barbara and Mark that pushed me to do some of these things. And we had fun doing it.
I remember it vividly because La Bamba became a talent show staple throughout your camper career. I actually have and I'll send it to you. I have a picture of you without a shirt on the Baru Hall stage from 1976, singing La Bamba. So I will send that to you after we finish here. I think what was also interesting about it is that your brothers took it up once you were kind of finished with it.
Yeah, but they don't know how to sing, Paul. They're just not good singers. So and the other side of it is Alberto never learned the words. So Alberto made up the words as he went along.
I love it. That's great.
Well, that's okay because it's rock and roll, right?
Right.
Yep.
So long as you shake, the idea probably was, hey, so long as you go up there, shake and move and take off your shirt, we're going to be okay.
That's it. No, that's great.
So that was part one of our three-part conversation with Rudy Valner, camper and counselor at Camp House Kramer and Gindling Hilltop Camp. Clap, clap. Please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss when part two comes out, where we talk about Rudy's experience in the musical productions at camp and so much more. Don't forget to mark your calendars for camp's upcoming events in Carlsbad this summer, including Mitzvah Night on June 27th, Shabbat 75 on Friday, July 24th, and Leadership Night on Saturday, July 25th. If you haven't heard from camp in a while, you can update your contact information by visiting wbtcamps.org/alumni/update your info, which is also linked down in the description, and that's how you'll be able to hear when registration opens up for all the events. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.